using 50% less radiation than previous scanners to
Well, good afternoon. Welcome, everybody, to the Administrative Committee meeting for the City of Moscow, and this is November 24th. On my right, Councilmember John Weber. I'm Wayne Krause. On my left, sitting in for Tom Lamar, is Art Betke. And Art didn't get the word on the dress code, but we're glad to have him anyway. So let's get started off with the very first thing, and that's approval of the October 27th meeting.
You got to tell him everything, and he still doesn't listen.
Yeah, well, you going to make a motion to approve the minutes?
I'm going to make a motion that we approve the minutes of the October 27th, 2014.
Okay,
Administrative
I'll second that,
Committee.
and I know you'll abstain, and so those minutes are passed. Okay, we have a proposed adoption of the 2012 International Residential Code, the 2012 International Mechanical Code, the 2012 International Fuel Gas Code, the 2012 International Energy Conservation Code, and the 2014 National Electrical Code, and last but not least, 2009 Uniform Plumbing Code. And we got Mike Chappell here. He's going to kind of explain all this to us. You're on.
Fantastic. Thank you, sir. Micah Chappell, building official. As most of us know, the construction codes are updated on a 3-year cycle. The plumbing code is a 5-year cycle. The state takes these adopted codes from the International Code Council, reviews them, takes advice from various state boards, and then provides amendments and then adopts those codes. The requirement for the city is to review their amendments and adoptions, and within a 12-month period after their adoption, or normally it's the January after their adoption from the state, we're allowed to propose amendments and then adopt the codes as well. Our local building code advisory committee, it consists of community members, including various trade contractors, architects, engineers, a few of the local building material suppliers, city staff, and a city council representative. They met over a course of several months to review and discuss these proposed significant changes to the codes. These code changes are primarily, for the most part, a clarification in gray areas of the code or codification of new products that are not formally recognized by the codes or were not previously recognized by building codes. After those meetings, the Building Code Advisory Committee made recommendations in various sections where they believed that certain clarification or additional requirements were warranted, and some of those recommendations were that we maintain current practices or continue codes that have been carried over from the previous versions. The approved code changes that are compiled in the amended ordinance, there are 2 amendments to the Uniform Plumbing Code. There are 9 amendments to the National Electrical Code. There are no amendments to the International Fuel Gas Code. There are only 3 amendments to the International Mechanical Code. There are no amendments to the International Property Maintenance Code. And then we looked at providing 7 amendments to the International Residential Code, for a total of 21 proposed amendments from the Building Code Advisory Board as well as by the state. And I'm here to provide that report to the committee on this proposed ordinance and ask that you forward it to the public hearing that is scheduled for this proposed ordinance at the upcoming council meeting on December 1st.
Okay, good job. John?
I think we ought to move ahead with this. We've got to put it, it's got to go to a public hearing anyway, and I think they've got everything set up the way it ought to be for the public hearing, so I think we ought to just move it forward.
I'm good with that, too.
That's the next step. We'll do that. Naturally, it goes on the regular agenda. Micah, thanks for explaining the fact that this does go before a committee made up of citizens, contractors, and so on and so forth. How much, just a couple questions. We have the International Building Code, and the state adopts that.
Yes, sir.
Do they always adopt it in its entirety?
No, sir. The state provides amendments as well that we review through our committee, and we can either follow their lead on their proposed amendments, modify to more restrictive amendments, and then we look at adopting from there.
Okay, if the state passes an amendment to the code, which is more restrictive, if the city were to look at that and say, we don't agree with that, and we don't want something that restrictive, are we able to do that?
We are, but we have to make findings for those changes to make it less restrictive.
And then that has to go back to the state for their okay? Or?
That goes through our notice of public hearing for our amendments. Those are sent back to the state and various other entities that review these, our proposed amendments, and can make comments as well as, the normal public could.
And I would also suspect that if we passed a lesser amendment, a less restrictive amendment, and then there is a major issue with that, with an extreme, maybe a loss of life or severe injury, then the city better be able to cover itself as to why it repassed a less restrictive amendment.
Correct, and that's why we have to make those findings and provide those with our amendments
Beforehand.
beforehand.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
I'm good.
All right. Well, we'll send that on to the meeting on the 8th. December 1st.
December 1st.
December 1st. That's right. Okay. Great.
Thank you.
Thanks, Micah.
Mike Ray is going to come up, and something that's been in the works for quite some time is the Fort Russell Reconnaissance Survey, and this would be about the Phase 3. I think we've got a picture story on this, too. Now, you're not going to go through all 581 pages on this, are you?
I'll save you the time on that. I had included it within your packet just to make certain I wasn't withholding any information from you, but I'll go through the highlights of what was contained within those two phases of those reports. And so find ourselves moving on to Phase 3 of the Fort Russell Reconnaissance Survey project. So just to give you a little bit of background where we've come from, Historic Preservation Commission had submitted grant applications and received 2 CLG grants, which stands for Certified Local Government, one in 2013 and the other in 2014, and this was for the reconnaissance survey, basically the Fort Russell existing historic district as well as the surrounding neighborhood. And so we had selected AD Preservation, a consulting firm out of Spokane, Washington, for a contract price of $10,500, and that required 50% match from the Historic Preservation Commission with a start date that ended up starting November of last year. They ended up completing Phase 1, Phase 2 by August 30th of this year, and now looking onward, just to cover Phase 1 was basically a survey or a resurvey of the existing district that contained 116 sites within the original Fort Russell district, and that was originally listed in 1980 was when we went through that process, and Fort Russell became a historic district. Phase 2 was basically all the surrounding properties on the periphery of the district, contained 320 sites on top of the 116 within the current district. And so just to give you a visual, the current district is outlined in red in your screen, top left corner. That would be the original historic district. You can see it's kind of unsymmetrical, kind of a zigzag pattern, kind of follows the topography in the northwest corner, but really no rhyme or reason in the other areas as well. We see the Fort Russell survey area, that's outlined in blue. And one question you may be asking yourself is, it looks like it's about 3 times the area of the existing district. Why did it extend maybe all the way down to 6th Street? And really, we had originally intended just to go down to 3rd Street, but when we reviewed the original plat maps within that area, you have 3 original plats that were originally platted in the 1880s. You have Russell First Edition, you also have Russell Second Edition, as well as the Park Edition, which probably encompasses the majority of the district. It also includes East City Park. And so it made sense to us to just go ahead and extend the reconnaissance survey boundary all the way down to 6th Street, and the intention here was that maybe it could inform us of maybe a potential another historic district in what they call Swedetown area, which is the 7th and 8th Street further to the south. And so, it doesn't hurt just to inventory additional properties just to better inform your decision about maybe, expanding the existing district. And so when the consultant went through both of these reconnaissance surveys, they looked at Sanborn insurance maps. You may have seen these. These were original plat maps that included basically boundaries of the area, plat maps, as well as footprints of existing buildings around that time. And so this is an example of one. December 1904 was the date of this Sanborn map. And so if you look at these specific areas, shows original building footprints. And so that allows the consultant to determine whether or not there's been additions done on residences, kind of the original placement of buildings on lots. And it's pretty helpful in showing kind of a development pattern and how the area developed. Basically, of these, around 437 properties that were surveyed, this is all the information that's included under each of these properties. So that's why you have about a 500-page document here. It's because they go through, document, take pictures of each property, each building, go through the site details, extensive information about how it was built, kind of the style of architecture, and then they give a recommendation about the, contributing or non-contributing. And contributing is structures that are contributing to the historic character of the district. They're actually on the National Register within that district. Non-contributing buildings, maybe they've had an addition or alteration that has basically put them in the non-contributing category, or maybe it was a house that was constructed quite a few years after, the 1930s when the district period of significance ended. And so did some research at the Latah County Historical Society. These are all images, included within the document. Just another example of kind of the extensive research that they'd gone through for this. So get to the findings of Phase 1 with the existing district. They had found that basically it still has retained the early significance for being a historic district. And the first one is architecture. And so it represents a rich display of early residential architecture. So it classifies in that category as well as being historical, meaning that it has this historical connection between these houses and the early people that basically built the town of Moscow. And they were usually business owners that lived in the Fort Russell Historic District and built these day mansion, some of these larger houses. And so you have basically two significant areas. Original had 116 properties. When the consultants went through here, they actually discovered there were 117 within the boundary, and one site was listed twice, and so they actually have 115 documented sites within the original Fort Russell district. So they had gone through and mapped. These are, and the ones represented in red are the contributing buildings, and the ones identified in blue are the non-contributing buildings. And so they had mapped out all those sites within the existing district. Also had taken a look at contributing, non-contributing. Basically, the original contained 70 sites with 7 non-contributing sites, but they also had this odd category that was non-contributing but compatible, and those were 39 sites. And so our consultants were a little bit dumbfounded because they hadn't seen that before in any other National Register nomination or listing, this third category of compatible. And basically I think this was the area or the sites that usually in order to be historic you have to be at least 50 years of age. And so these were some of the properties that were probably around in 1980. They were built in the 30s. They still had that historic character, but they weren't quite of the 50-year horizon. And so I think they were listed as non-contributing but compatible should another 10 years or so pass. And so that's what we ended up with that. And so 60% of the original sites within the district are contributing. Looking at our consultants' work, the reconnaissance survey identified 91 of those sites now, so we bumped up 21 from the original. Non-contributing was 24 is what they had identified, so we went from 60% contributing to 79% contributing with basically the reconnaissance survey. And what mentioned before, 50-year cutoff was 1930 as a possible reason, and then you also have these other styles of architecture, reaching their ripeness about the 50-year mark. And so those are kind of the reasons why we've increased contributing within the area. And so they went through and documented the other 320 properties in the periphery. Once again, red's contributing and blue is non-contributing. What they had found within Phase 2, basically that 151 of the sites were contributing and 169 sites were non-contributing. And so that equates to about 47%. So when you're looking at a historic district, you want at least 50% of the sites to be contributing. If you were to add the original 116 properties or 115 properties within the original district, it would bring you above the 50% mark combined. Looking ahead at Phase 3, Historic Preservation Commission and staff really had envisioned this in two parts. The first part being basically the reconnaissance survey final report. And part of that final report, we were going to look at the historical context, a lot of which is already contained within the Phase 1, Phase 2 of the reconnaissance survey. So they would just be, buttoning that up, just refining that a little bit more, looking at more of the historical development trends. Like we said, basically have those three original plats within the reconnaissance survey area. Well, just because it was originally platted doesn't mean that all of a sudden 437 properties showed up within 10 years. We really want to figure out kind of how that developed, and that will help us inform us as to maybe an appropriate boundary now. Looking at the period of significance, that's really important because that defines the area of, or the era of the homes that are contributing to the historic district. And so if you look at downtown, your period of significance is around 1890 to 1957, and that's the commercial district. And so our consultant had said, well, you could basically duplicate what you had done downtown and, do a period of significance between 1890 and maybe 1960. Well, I don't think it's, necessarily we want to extend it that far. Maybe we want to just go to 1940. And so we want to have, historic preservation and the consultant take a look, greater look at that to maybe further refine the period of significance so it's not so broad. We don't water down the district per se. Also wanted to look at, contributing building criteria. It's really subjective when you get a group of historians, architectural historians in the room, as to what they believe is original character or, what should be contributing, non-contributing. And so we really just wanted the consultant to do some type of metric. Maybe you have to look at, it has to meet 3 of 5 criteria. It has to be the original placement on the lot. Maybe maybe it's done in an addition, but it's keeping with the historic character. Maybe the siding's been replaced with vinyl siding when it was originally wood siding. And so, kind of developing something that's a little less subjective, that if you meet, maybe 3 of 5 of these things, then you're a contributing building within the district. And so wanted to have them take a little look, further refine that. And out of those, first 4 things, this will pretty much give us a greater understanding about maybe where the district boundary should be, and then provide us with a recommendation about where that district boundary should fall. And so, we'd envision, that was the first part, and then obviously, before each part, we'd come to the council and get authorization to proceed to the next step. The next part would be, ultimately submitting a National Register nomination. But first, after we received our recommendation from the consultant, we'd go to basically public input. And so it's envisioned that we'd conduct a series, 1 or 2 of open houses to go over the findings and the recommendation, and to gather input of people that are, currently in the historic district, ones that maybe are proposed to be in the historic district, and then maybe, other houses within, a certain distance of the proposed district. So there'll be that public input component, and then develop those final aspects of the period of significance, contributing building, and the district boundary. And then from that, from the public hearing, basically ask authorization from council to submit a National Register nomination with that revised district. So just go over the funding real quick. We have a proposal from the consultant for $4,000. 23 of that is proposed to be funded in 2014 CLG grant funding, which we have remaining from Phase 1 and Phase 2, and that's allowed to be carried over in a 2-year cycle. So we have until the end of August of 2015 basically to expend those funds. We also have $2,000 which we've budgeted within the Historic Preservation Commission's line item for the 50% contribution or the match for those grants. And so right now we have full funding to proceed. The Commission's just seeking council authorization to proceed with Phase 3, just Part 1 at this point. And so if authorized, I'm proposing to bring you a draft at the December 8th Administrative Committee for your review. So with that, I'd certainly be able to answer any questions you might have.
Well, years ago, we lived in Fort Russell on the corner of D and Howard. And what does that mean if your house is in the historic Fort Russell?
Well, we like to say it's more of an honor than an obligation. You know, you're not required to paint your house a certain color. You can tear it down tomorrow if you want. It's basically just notoriety that, you know, we're preserving this area of town through a National Register nomination and listing, but it's really no obligation for any property owner within the historic district. There's no restrictions at all.
So if we, as a city, and get the approval from the National Historical Society to expand the boundaries, we are just adding more houses.
Yeah, it'd be the same as it is today. We'd just be amending the boundary to possibly include more properties. But, you know, in the 35 years that it's been a historic district, I'm sure that we would have heard, or you would have heard of somebody requiring them to paint it a certain color, or so, you know, some restriction. You know, you would have heard of by now, and there's no restrictions for being on the National Register. The restrictions come in when the community wants to develop a local register, a local listing, and so this is different because it's national as opposed to local. That's really the mechanism to do your, you know, has to be a certain paint color. You know, you see it more prevalent in property or in cities back east, you know, Charleston, who makes quite a living on tourism. You know, they want to preserve that original architecture, and they don't want, you know, all of a sudden a building to be torn down and a new modern building to pop up, because it could ruin their tourism for certain districts by the waterfront, and you know, those are just kind of examples. And no, we're not proposing any type of local restrictive district. This is just basically an amendment of the current Fort Russell Historic District. And
then the money that you just spoke about, that looks like it's over about a 3-year period, 13, 14, and 15.
Yep, we had those couple grants in 2013 and 2014, and they're pretty flexible, and they allow us to expend it in a 2-year period, and so we had more than we needed in 2014, and so it cost $10,500, and we basically received about $7,300 in funds, and so we have $2,300 remaining, and we're allowed to carry that over to 2015 and use it for Phase 3 of this project. So,
yeah, I think identification of the fundings is great, and provision of the data to support an application for the historic district is also really good, and I think it's a great idea just to proceed.
Great.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yep. It's really interesting, you know, having been the liaison for the Historical Preservation Commission for, I think this is my 3rd or 4th year, not consecutive, but it's when you look at these homes, some of these homes, and you look at the intricate designs, whether it's in the eaves or whether it's in the soffits or where it is, it really is worth taking a double look at the craftsmanship that was put into a lot of these homes back at the turn of the century. Now, one question I was going to ask you, when we were talking about expanding the district, we talked about going to Hayes, and one of the thoughts at the time was that was where the city limits ended at in 1890, but I think you found out otherwise, didn't you?
Yeah, we looked at the original plat maps, and it was always pretty much Blaine Street. And so, that could kind of be a common misconception. Hayes and Blaine, parallel each other, and it ended up being Blaine Street.
So that in itself can have something to do or have some bearing upon the expansion of the district. So
Sure.
Great. We can put this on the consent agenda, and thank you very much.
Thank
Good
you.
report.
Thanks.
Chief Brian Nickerson is going to present a discussion on thermal imaging cameras through an Assistance to Firefighters grant with Jen Piffner also. Hi, guys.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. I'm actually, sitting in for Elisa Anderson, who's out this week. Elisa and Brian have been working on a grant to the Assistant to Firefighters program, looking at some equipment replacements that they're interested in looking at. Currently, the Moscow Fire Department has 2 thermal imaging cameras, one of these yellow and black numbers here. These are each 13 years old and a bit antiquated, and don't have a mobile recharge capability. So the fire department would like to pursue the grant funding to purchase anywhere from 5 to 6 units, depending on price. This type of equipment is considered by the American Assistance to Firefighters grant as a basic equipment piece that is a high priority item. So the grant would allow us to replace those 2 outdated cameras with, like I said, 5 to 6 new units that are able to be placed in fire vehicles with chargers, so they're always ready. The cost of the units range from $11,000 to $14,000 a piece, depending on the outlet. The grant itself would be for $70,000 with a 10% match, which would be $7,000 from the city. The grant's due on December 5th and would be awarded in early March, with the expectation that the grant would be completed by September of next year.
I think it's a good idea.
Want to add your 2 bits worth of your sales pitch on this?
Well, I think Jen pretty much said it all. I mean, you can see by the bulkiness of that, they don't make them quite that big no more, but they're just as rugged. There's a lot of technology that has changed over the last 13 years that we're going to be looking at. And again, it goes down to the cost and how many we can get. There's wireless technology to them. There's video capture. There's still pictures. All those type of capabilities now that could be beneficial down the road.
I thought that was interesting in reading the packet when I talked about the wireless capabilities, which gives you the opportunity to look from a mobile from the base unit where you're at, what your guys are actually seeing, and from a safety standpoint, I can see where that would be extremely beneficial. Plus the fact that they're charged all the time.
Yeah, this right now is kept in a case in the back of a truck, and somebody has to remember to charge it. So the reason we're going from 2 to maybe 4 or 5 or 6 of them is to actually put them on the engines, have them charging, every day when they're plugged in, and then a battalion unit, hopefully we can get a inverter to actually have them charge as well. So depending on the cost and whether we can do the wireless or whether we can just do the video capture or whatever. So we're just kind of playing with the numbers to see where we're going to end up once we hopefully get the grant.
Do you use these a lot? For instance, if you think you've got a fire knocked down, but for scanning in the walls in the attic to see if there's hot spots up there?
We use them for search, for overhaul, which is basically after the fire. Just any hidden fires throughout the whole building. If you walk along the floor, you'll actually see, John's feet across the floor. It's that sensitive. Yeah, it's footprints. Yeah, because of the heat.
Really?
So it just and we can use it for light fixtures and stuff. And I know Bill has some stuff too for his department. So there's multiple uses for these. So
cool.
I think it's really handy to have from a safety standpoint and benefit to the community.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
It really is.
Well,
And
it's one of the
besides-
things that keeps our volunteer fire department at a professional level that it's at.
Yeah, I think it's great.
We're all for it, so let's move it forward.
awesome. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yep.
That thing weighs a
You're right,
ton.
this is kind of bulky.
It's kind of bulky.
It weighs.
Want to do that on consent, or we want to put that on a regular agenda? If we put it on a regular agenda, then they get to talk a little bit about it, and the citizens will hear really what's going on, and it gives them a little more insight as to what fire department's doing.
I'll go either way.
I'd like to see it discussed a little bit more, just to let people know what's
I
going on.
would too. Let's put it on the regular agenda. Sorry, Chief, you got to come to another meeting.
Sorry. No problem.
Now we have another chief, Chief Dave Duke, to talk about Office of Highway Safety and the Traffic Enforcement Mobilization Program. Chief, welcome.
Good afternoon. The Idaho Transportation Department has sent out their annual request for law enforcement agencies throughout the state to partner with them in coordinating the traffic enforcement mobilizations for fiscal year 2015. Police Department has partnered with ITD and their Office of Highway Safety for the past 14 years in an effort to reduce accidents and injuries associated with these collisions. For this year, ITD has transitioned all their reporting requirements electronically and has also changed the way they have scheduled their mobilization efforts. Previously, all the mobilization efforts were in a 1 to 2 week period, but this year they are taking 2 of those out and extending them through a month at a time or up to 3 months at a time. The first one begins at the oncoming of these holidays. And then the second one, known as the 100 Deadliest Days, will be throughout the summer. They've looked at statistics and want to focus their efforts on those times those are collisions, especially the serious and fatality accidents are occurring, so we can make those efforts specific to certain times where people are actually out there, especially in the summer, where they're driving whether it's in the country, but most of the fatalities are in the rural areas, but they want us to focus on those areas here that include aggressive driving, drunk driving, or impaired driving, and then an emphasis on seat belts. Participation in the mobilization program this year is initiated through a traffic enforcement mobilization agreement. Previously, we'd done an MOU, but I guess they wanted to make it extend a few more syllables out. But it's mostly the same. And we'll partner with the Office of Highway Safety through this grant. And if it's approved, we will be partnering with them for 7 traffic mobilizations through the year. Of those 7, 6 will include equipment incentive monies that we can direct toward purchasing additional equipment. For the 7, if you approve it, we will bring in officers on a paid overtime so they can make those enforcement efforts and educational efforts to reach out to our community. And then for the 6 incentive equipment mobilizations, the department will assign on-duty officers when they're available to specifically focus on those same 3 areas of impaired driving, aggressive, and seat belts. And then for every hour that we dedicate, we will get a $20 credit to purchase additional equipment that's on their list. This last year, we were able to buy 450 children bike helmets. These helmets are set to be distributed during the 2015 Officer New Bill Kid Safety Fair. After reviewing the mobilization agreement, the city's met all the required certification and assurances required by ITD, and there is no match for any of these grant dollars. Police Department is requesting the council and this committee to accept the mobilization agreement before you and to be ready to start these mobilizations and accept the funding. And I'm open to any questions you may have.
I don't have any.
No, I'm good. Anything that, any efforts that we spend and that the city police spends working on traffic control, cutting down DUIs, things like that, I think is well-spent effort, well-spent money.
And subsequently recouping some of that for equipment purchases like kids' bike hats and stuff.
Getting you a shirt.
No, that doesn't count. Maybe a hat. The equipment that's an important thing, and the question that I have is, through this mobilization program, Chief, how much? And this is really a broad question, but how much do you feel your officers have contributed to the additional safety of Moscow?
I believe because we're out there making those traffic contacts, those educational meetings to discourage those behaviors, I think it within the hours that we dedicate 10 to 20% more than we would if we didn't have this funding.
Okay. Good. Well, we agree. Let's move it to council. I think we can go consent agenda on that one.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chief.
All right. City Attorney Rod Hall, we have an amendment to the vending ordinance. Something
Good
we've kind of
afternoon.
been talking about a little bit.
Yeah, I think the last time we met, we had talked about getting some guidance, some directions for this amendment. This issue has been going around for a while. I'll just read the description that currently under the Moscow City Code, we have the ordinance regulates street vendors, but food trucks or the mobile vending units are not specifically allowed or permitted within the city, even though we do have a couple of operators in town, especially at weekend nights or in the evenings that are operating. We have worked with our code to allow them, but this will give them actually specific permission to operate. And this proposed amendment will set limitations for their operations, especially the food trucks operating downtown within the central business district. We don't really want them competing with brick and mortars that have been established, so right now they currently operate from 9 in the evening until 3 o'clock in the morning, usually when the restaurants downtown are closing or getting ready to close. This amendment would specifically allow the food trucks. Also in this amendment, we've had some requests from the sidewalk vendors or the vendors, or vending sites, vending units, what we call. I'll talk about that. I think we'll probably need to make a change in this as we go through this. The third site is right now they're limited to 24 square feet. Some people operating are a little bit larger than that, some more so than others, and it's been requested that they be allowed to have a little more operating room, because you got to talk about their cart. If they have a table, so that and to have a trash receptacle, that it expands more than the 24. So with this amendment, we would expand the operation size specifically up to 36 square feet, and that should allow most vending units. We also make sure that pedestrians will be able to travel around and not be impeded by the operation. Also, with the change here before you, the second part of this will be that the guidelines for vendors are spelled out in a 2004 resolution, 2004-08. And we believe, or staff believes, that by putting the guidelines into a city policy, it would be a lot more user-friendly, customer-friendly for people to find out what the rules and guidelines are for vending operations. And so what we propose is that if you accept the amendment, then we would move forward with accepting the food guidelines under the policy. We've made a few changes there. And then reading through the proposed ordinances, I had a conversation with Councilor Steed this morning and thought that there may be some conflict or misunderstanding in the words. Right now we're using a mobile vending unit, and then the other one is just a vending unit. And then when we try to differentiate in there, if we're not talking about the mobile vending unit in the code, talk about portable vending units. Right now, what I would suggest, if you're willing to go forward with this, is that I'd amend the vending unit definition to call that a sidewalk vending unit, and leave the mobile vending unit to describe the vendors who are using motor vehicles.
That was exactly my question, too.
Oh, he just took your glory away.
He did. Darn it, you anticipated.
John?
I'm good with it. I think it helps clarify, which more than anything else I think needed to be done, and it lets people know that want to engage in this sort of business activity, what they can do, when they can do it, and where they can do it. And there won't be nearly as many questions proceeding from the event as there have been now. So, yeah.
36 square feet, that would also include an umbrella or whatever cover they have over the top. It couldn't be any larger than that.
That's what. Well, right now, currently, the umbrella can encompass a bigger area than what that 24 square feet. I mean, it's just covering something, but it can't be impeding people. And then it has a height limitation. It's got to be at least 8 feet high, so people can travel underneath it.
So we're going to 36 square foot now, but will they be able to still have a larger umbrella that would extend out?
No, I think hopefully what this will do is clarify the 36 square feet should be large enough to.
Then the other question I had is you identified the hours of 9 to 3. Did you do some research that this is when our restaurants downtown are actually closing?
I believe the city clerk might have did that because that's what they've been operating under for the last few years, under those limitations.
That was, in my mind, 10 to 3 at the earliest would be, I think, more appropriate. But I have never paid that much. I know I've we've eaten as late as 8:30, 9 o'clock, but I'm not aware of the time, really the closing time, so.
And most of them are usually starting to wrap up their operations for the evening. There are some that maybe go a little bit longer.
I think a lot of them also, a lot of the brick and mortars would just as soon have a vendor outside to catch that traffic going back to campus.
Be a good point there.
Instead of having them come in when other people are trying to have a quiet dinner. Not that anybody in this room ever would have been part of that other crowd. Wayne.
No, of course not. Okay, we'll move that forward to council. That'll be a regular agenda item.
And then, Bill, we could talk at the end of this about the planning and zoning update. Okay, then the next item.
End next item is, get to the page on here, amendment to the taxi ordinance. This was kind of interesting.
Yeah.
In the last summer, we had somebody come into the city clerk and asked about operating a pedicab within the city. We looked through the city code, and there wasn't anything regulating pedicabs, but then did a little research. There's some cities throughout the state and probably throughout the country that are requiring a license and insurance for pedicabs. And it makes sense that if people are going to be operating on our city streets, that there should be some requirements. I'll go through the description. The City of Moscow and its operations understands the concerns and necessity of protecting the environment. Moscow encourages its citizens and businesses to be aware of our shared environment and take steps to mitigate any detrimental consequences from actions that affect the environment. Moscow looks for ways to allow opportunities in further pursuit of sustainable environmental business practices within the city. And under the current code, only taxi cabs are specifically allowed to operate within the city on the city streets. Like I told you, we were approached by a pedicab, and so we explored ways to allow alternative means for paid transportation to operate within the city, specifically pedicab cabs. This proposed amendment will help ensure that public safety in the operation of non-motorized vehicles using city streets for alternative paid transportation. And in order to maintain public health and safety concerns, staff believes that every operator of paid transportation using city streets should be licensed. As we were going through this, so this hadn't been specifically presented yet, but it could be, we added also carriage operations. We could foresee somebody at some point maybe wanting to operate on the streets, and this would regulate that also.
I thought it was rather humane of you to put in there that you could get a booster motor on the pedicab, too, to kind of help out on hills, I assume.
Yes, and the whole idea is if you do have that assist, it's not to be the main mode of operating that, main source of power.
Very humane.
So if the city had nothing in the ordinance to regulate pedicabs, does that mean that somebody could just go out and do it? They're not breaking any laws.
I would think that they could. It'd be just like a bicycle. They'd have to abide by all the rules of the road.
Right.
However, with the license, that would probably require some insurance.
Yep.
Yeah, it would be requiring that they're protected. I mean, if you're going to be doing a business that, driving on the street, pose people in dangerous situations.
So the insurance would probably protect the city from,
should protect everybody.
Yeah.
Spells out minimum $500,000 per incident, and pedicabs not less than $100,000.
Yeah.
Okay. All sounds good. So we'll move that to council and as a regular agenda item also.
And then also, when we were talking about amending the vending ordinance, we also had a discussion about vendors, the temporary vendors that set up on the side of the highway in vacant lots. And I think Bill's going to take it to planning and zoning, and they're going to discuss ways to regulate that. Some of the concerns are ingress and egress from those lots and parking. I don't want people just driving onto vacant lots and, when it's wet and just tearing them up, because that doesn't look very good. Mm-hmm. And then the safety issue is people going onto those lots to visit the vendor and then coming back out onto this site. So there's some issues that need to be addressed.
Okay.
Coming forward at your next committee meeting, we'll give you a report.
Good. Okay. We don't have any reports coming before this committee. So is there any other business that we need to conduct that you gentlemen know of? We're at the end of the agenda, and we are now adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Rob.